week. It now appears to be turning into a bit of a row, a blame game. Who was responsible and what was the best response to that power outage at Heathrow Airport? The chief executive of the National Grid, John Pettigrew, has confirmed there was enough power, he says, to keep Heathrow open throughout Friday's shutdown. And Heathrow, for its part, is now under pressure to explain why flights were actually suspended for 18 hours. Well, someone who can help us understand what exactly went on is Simon Gallagher, the Managing Director of UK Network Services. That is a consultancy specialising in large connections and grid resilience. Simon, good morning. Just the man.
Good morning.
Okay, so can we, the dust is settling a bit in terms of what happened on Friday. What do you understand actually went wrong?
Well, the main thing went wrong was a large transformer, so it's a big electrical machine in a substation about a mile away from Heathrow. That went on fire, which was fine. The grid's designed to cope with that, although it looks serious. Unfortunately, the one next to it, so there's two transformers, there's actually three there, but the one next to it got damaged, and at that stage then they couldn't maintain all supply. So at that stage about 60,000 customers lost electricity, including Heathrow Airport, which is sad for everyone who lost electricity, but Europe's major hub airport, that's why this is such a big story. So that's the prime reason why electricity was lost. Okay,
so there's basically an issue of backups in the grid, in the substations, but also Heathrow's own backups. So the substation had backups in a way, backup transformers or other sources of power that could go into the airport. What do you make of this idea that actually was it potentially they jumped too fast to close the airport and they could have actually kept it going?
Yeah, so there's three substations on Heathrow itself. Two of them are fed from this one that went on fire, so they're out for the duration, which leaves one substation alive. And when we look at the data on that substation does actually have enough capacity to keep the whole airport running, but it's not a simple case of just switching from one substation to another. It would take hours and hours to do the manual reconfiguration of the high voltage network. So there's truth in what both parties are saying here. Yes, National Grid are absolutely correct in that there was enough electrical capacity available to the airport to keep it on supply, and Heathrow's right that it takes hours to do that. The one thing I would say though is that and this is the same for every UK airport, so every UK airport has the same vulnerability. Heathrow's right in that regard, but if the airport industry takes a leaf out of some other industry's book, so right next to Heathrow is a brand new data centre called Union Park. That's got an electricity supply 4 times the size of Heathrow. It's 150 megawatts. And they have installed enough standby generation that if they lose grid supplies, they will never go off supply because they've got huge generators ready to take up the slack. So I think it's a UK-wide thing where the airports are going to have to look around and say, is it right that we don't have the same resilience as modern data centres? And in fact, there's no news this week about data centres because those very data centres were affected by this, but they didn't go off supply. So no one's complaining about data centres, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. So you think basically Heathrow should be planning for that eventuality, and Heathrow and other airports, but Heathrow, of course, is the biggest. They should be planning for that eventuality and actually should be investing in generation.
Well, that's for Heathrow to make a decision because
how much of an investment would that be?
Well, it's a big investment, so it's going to be sort of 15-20 million pounds minimum for them to install those generators. Although I suspect when you look back at the disruption caused and the cost to society and the economy, that might look like a relatively good investment. But it's not easy for them either, because the minute they say we want to spend all this money, they have to talk to the regulator because they're regulated, and then they have to put prices up to the airline. So it's not just a simple thing of spending all this money either. But it's fair to say that the technology certainly exists that Heathrow could stay on supply for any loss of grid.
Right. How does this compare to other major hubs around the world? You said UK airports are similarly affected and haven't done this sort of in terms of preparedness. But what about around the world? Are there other airports that are ahead of the game?
Yeah. So if we look at sort of comparable hub airports, so Schiphol in Amsterdam, they did have problems in 2018. So they had a grid problem that meant they lost supplies as well. But since that now, they have put in a lot of generation. So they don't actually have enough generation to power everything, but they have this automatic system that if they do lose supplies, it cuts off the shops in the terminals. So terminals stay on, the planes keep moving, you just can't buy coffee, which seems fairly sensible. If we look at Dubai, the Middle East is probably better prepared than anywhere because they're relatively new airports. So Dubai International, they've got 3 independent 132,000 volt feeds from 3 different substations, and they've got generation. So on the international stage, the airports are fairly resilient.
So when you say generation, are we talking about diesel generators?
Yeah, well, it can be diesel or gas. So
Okay.
the data center I talked about next to Heathrow, that is diesel. But you can use gas off the gas mains as well. Or some people use HVO, which is like a more sustainable version of diesel from biocrops.
Right. So there could be potentially like a halfway house that would have allowed, if they'd had a certain level of backup, because their argument is that they had backup, but it wasn't enough to keep all the systems going. But if they had kind of upped that a bit, they could have had a halfway house, keep the flights going, but not the rest of the airport infrastructure.
I think it's one thing or the other. Like, it's absolutely spot on to say at all times, no safety is compromised because they have standby generators that powers the critical systems. So the runway lights and the radio systems and air traffic control, that all stayed alive. But, and there's a big caveat here, when them systems are on backups, you then can't use them because they're on a backup. And if something did happen, there's no more backup. So you can't be in a situation where...
So you always need a backup.
Yeah.
You need a backup to a backup to a backup.
Safety critical systems have to run with a backup ready to take over. So if you're going to back up the airport so that it can maintain operations, you sort of have to back up the whole thing. So just like a data center, supplies are never interrupted. The airport keeps running. That is a more sensible solution than a piecemeal trying to back up bits or the other.
What did you make of the eventual time it took Heathrow to get back up running? I mean, it was like 18 hours or something, wasn't it? Do you think that was a fair amount of time for it to be closed and reopened? I mean, he said, the chairman of Heathrow, that he was proud of how the airport did get back on its feet.
I think you can separate out the two things. I think you can without a doubt say that the engineers involved did a Herculean task, because clearly 18 hours, that's not a prepared, ready to go plan. That's engineers thinking out of the box, rerouting things. And it's right that you're not running planes when you're trying to do these temporary arrangements. But if the airports want to be more resilient, then they have to invest in basically much more resilient backup systems.
And we know that the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, is going to review. She's announced 2 reviews into what actually went wrong. I mean, is this the kind of thing that the government is going to be looking at? And is there a way the government could say to the airports, look, you have to do this?
Yeah, I mean, we know what went wrong now. I mean, we know that if the government want the airports to be more resilient, then there is a cost associated with that. So, we need to do the review to understand what actually happened, but we're almost there in terms of what the outcomes will be.
Okay, Simon, thanks so much for that. Simon Gallagher there, Managing Director of UK Network Services, talking us through what went wrong at Heathrow. Many thanks indeed. Now,